evening, everyone. It's Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. Welcome to another edition of Super Dwarf Sunday. I am joined this evening by Tao Seti from Reach Out Reptiles. TC didn't want to completely come out of his humidity hide this evening. He was partway out of his enclosure but still attached to his humid hide. And so I just lifted the whole thing out for him to continue resting in or on if he wanted to while we were making this video. Today is Sunday, April 26, 2020, and this is going to be episode number 2 in our enrichment series that we're doing for Super Dwarf Sunday. The enrichment that we're talking about is applicable to all snakes and many types of reptiles, not just super dwarf reticulated pythons, but we are going to be talking enrichment for the next few episodes of Super Dwarf Sunday. Last week we talked about physical enrichment. Just to remind everybody about the 5 enrichment categories that we will be going over, the AZA recognizes 5 enrichment categories. The first one being cognitive enrichment, the second being food or dietary enrichment, the third being physical enrichment, which is what we talked about in last week's episode. The fourth is sensory enrichment, and the fifth is social enrichment. This week, we're going to be following up on physical enrichment. We started making some clips for food enrichment or dietary enrichment, which is going to be our next full enrichment episode. However, we had some questions after last week's episode about physical enrichment that I thought were important to go ahead and follow up with this week and answer. So let's just review what physical enrichment means. Physical enrichment is anything that you can do for your snake that's going to encourage physical activity. We went over some objects that you could put in the enclosure that could stimulate movement and provide physical exercise for your snake. And then I showed a lot of things that we have here at our facility outside of the snake's enclosure that when the snake is out of their normal habitat is available for them to use. And we talked about taking them out of their normal habitat and letting them do some exercising or roaming in your home or outside or on actual activity stations or in super large enclosures that are different from their normal habitat. We talked about a lot of ideas to stimulate your snake to get exercise. We're going to answer the questions that came up about that. Let's just take a look at what those were. All right, one of the questions that I was asked, do you find the snake's behavior changes at night? I try and avoid getting them out at night. Mine are a lot more relaxed during the day. Well, the answer is, of course, their behavior is different at night. Depending on what species of snake you have, they might be nocturnal, which means they are naturally active at night, and they're going to be sleeping or resting all day. Or they might be diurnal, which means that their most active time is going to be during the day, and mostly at night they're going to hunker down somewhere and rest or sleep. Or they may be crepuscular. And crepuscular snakes are those that are very, very active at dawn and dusk. So kind of first thing in the morning, the early hours of the morning, they're very active. And then they're very inactive all day. And then they get active again early evening. So depending on what type of snake you have and what is their normal activity pattern, yes, their activity is going to be different during the daytime, perhaps in the evening or during the night. And I can tell you that I only choose to interact with my snakes when they're naturally awake, unless of course it's an emergency. So let me give you an example. I don't appreciate somebody coming into my house, coming into my bedroom, ripping the covers off of me while I'm sleeping and waking me up because they want me to go jogging with them, or they want me to watch TV, or they want me to do some activity with them. I wouldn't be very happy. Now, if someone did that and it was an emergency, if someone came into my house and burst into my bedroom and ripped the covers off my bed and said, Lori, the house is on fire, we have to get out, that would be different. And I try to show my snakes the same respect. So when they're resting or sleeping, I leave them alone. Unless there is some exigent circumstances that I absolutely have to get them up during their normal downtime, I leave them alone. I wait for them to be awake and to see them being naturally active before I interact with them at all. If you have any more questions or comments about that, feel free to send those to me. All right, the other question. Oh, and part of that last question was I try and avoid getting them out at night. Mine are a lot more relaxed during the day. Well, they're a lot more tired during the day, and you've woken them up during their sleep. Sometimes that can backfire on you, and they're not very happy to be woken up during the time when they're asleep. But sometimes they seem more relaxed because they're just very, very tired. They're groggy, as we would be if we were woken up in the middle of our sleep. And I just don't like to do that to them because we aren't really giving them an opportunity to show us their natural behavior at a time when they're fully awake and active. The second question I got this week as a follow-up to the physical enrichment episode that we did. Everything I've heard about snakes is that taking them out of their enclosure and in the open stresses them out and not to do it for long. Does it depend on the kind of snake, or is that just a myth? Well, it does depend. It not only depends on the species of snake, but it also very much depends on the individual snake. Some snakes are not stressed at all by being out of their enclosure. Some snakes are in the middle, and some snakes don't want to come out of their enclosure ever. They get extremely stressed. Well, how do you know this? This is where you have to do some preference testing and find out. And I'm going to show some video clips in this episode that will clearly show you snakes that want out of their enclosure versus snakes that are mediocre about it versus snakes that absolutely do not want to come out of their enclosure. I did a whole video that is called My Snake Wants Out, and it's all full of snakes that are seeking time out of their enclosure and immediately come out as soon as I open the door. Those snakes obviously are not stressed out of their enclosure. They want out. We just have to give them the opportunity to do that to find out which category they fit into. Now, Tau Ceti is middle of the road. Sometimes Tau Ceti is at his glass, pacing his glass or pushing on the glass. He really looks like he wants out of his enclosure. I'll open the door and step back because we don't want to influence their behavior. We just want to present an opportunity and see what they do. Sometimes he'll come out and sometimes he won't. Sometimes he'll just sit there on the enclosure threshold for hours. And it's almost as if all he wanted was just for the door to be open so that he could look out and sit there. So I call him a middle of the road snake because he doesn't always want out. Sometimes he wants out and he'll come out on his own, and sometimes he doesn't. And then there are snakes that are at the opposite end of the spectrum. We have 4 rainbow boas. I am lucky to see them once every 2 or 3 weeks. They're very, very shy. They do not want to come out of their enclosure. And if I take them out of the enclosure for some reason, they have to go to the vet. I need to weigh them. I just really need them to come out so that I can do enclosure maintenance. They are very stressed about that, and they show signs of stress. In reference to this question, which was I've always heard snakes are stressed when you take them out of their enclosure and you shouldn't do it for long. Is that a myth, or does it depend? It is a myth. You can't generalize like that. Some snakes do not want to come out of their habitats. They would be very stressed if you force them out of their habitats. Some snakes sometimes want to come out and sometimes don't. And then other snakes, like the one behind me, Bennu, when he's not in shed, he wants out almost every night. He's demanding about wanting out, and he pushes so hard on that glass that I think if we didn't have a lock on it, he would be able to slide it open. So you're going to have the whole spectrum of behaviors there. Some snakes are going to be more stressed if you don't allow them that time out of their enclosure than if you leave them in. So it just depends. What I do find is if you're forcing your snake out of the enclosure, whether it's a snake that normally likes to come out or not, that is stressful to them. Think about when you're forced to do something. That is stressful. I'm sure it's stressful to you. It's stressful for me when I feel like I'm being forced into doing something. Well, your animals don't like being forced out of their enclosure. And so part of that myth in herpetoculture may be because I think a lot of keepers go into the enclosure, invade their animal's space, and force them to come out. And of course that's going to be stressful. And that is very, very different than opening the doors to the enclosure and moving away, standing back, and allowing the animal to choose whether they come out or not. The third follow-up question was, what do you use for your horizontal PVC type perches, and what do you use to anchor them with? That's a great question. I've been asked that question before. I need to do a whole video about perch making, but until I get around to doing that, I'm going to show you what those perches look like, so let me grab them. Most of my perches are these 3/4 inch PVC perches, but obviously you can use any diameter PVC that you think would be appropriate for your snake. And I buy the PVC in bundles. TC, do you want to climb on this tree? Because I need both my hands right now. He doesn't appear to want to climb on that right now. All right, so this is 3/4 inch PVC. I've got end caps on the end, and I'll show you one that I don't have hooks in yet. So I put the appropriate size end caps on each end of the PVC once I've cut it to the size that I want. And the size is going to depend on where you want to hang that in the enclosure. Do you want to hang it diagonal in a corner? Do you want to hang it straight across from side to side? Do you want to hang it a little bit higher on one end and lower on the other? All that's going to be up to you, but you're going to have to measure that space that you want to put it in. But the bottom line is I use PVC, I cut it to the length I need, I put end caps on, and then I screw these eye hooks in, and I hang the PVC perches with some type of adhesive hook. So here's an example of an adhesive hook, and it just sticks on to the glass or other smooth surface. I have found that these adhesive hooks come in different strengths, meaning some of them say they only hold 1/2 pound, all the way on up to 8 pounds. So you need to take into consideration the weight of the snake that's going to be using the perch, and you're going to have one at each end of your perch. And so theoretically, if each one of these adhesive hooks holds 2 pounds, then this whole perch should be able to hold 4 pounds because you've got one at each end. Now, I haven't found these to be very successful on textured surfaces, so they need to be on a smooth surface, like glass, smooth plastic, some type of smooth PVC, just a smooth surface. You've got to clean that surface with alcohol first and let it completely dry before you stick the adhesive hooks on. And if you do that, I haven't had any issues with them coming off. The only time you may have an issue with them coming off is if you have it hanging right underneath heat. Because using a hair dryer and heating these up real hot is how you can get them to come off if you want to move them. The other things that I have used to hang these perches are magnetic perch holders from Specialty Enclosure Designs. Those work well and they're stronger than adhesive hooks. However, those magnets can be dangerous, so you need to be careful. Those are super powerful magnets and they're a little bit difficult to work with. You also have to order the magnets separate from where you order the perch holders, and so that can be kind of a little bit of a pain. The other way that I have hung these, if I'm using a plastic enclosure, a tub, or a PVC or wood enclosure that I don't mind using a hole saw to make a hole in the side, I'll cut a hole in the side of the tub. I will put the PVC through, and then I will put the end cap on, and that locks it in place. And that also allows me to remove those if I want to, just the way that these eye hooks and the adhesive hooks allow me to remove the perches if I need to. I'll show you what that looks like. I'm going to upload some video clips about some of the things I talked about, and I'll go ahead and narrate those. This baby Bredley is 1 month younger than Tau Seti. She was pacing her glass, so I opened the door for her and then I walked away. I just waited to see what she would do. She immediately climbed out of her enclosure. There wasn't an activity station or an exercise space near her enclosure. These particular baby enclosures are just on a shelf. So I waited for her to climb mostly out onto the shelf. And then I picked her up at the middle. Just like I'm always telling you guys in the videos, stay away from the head, stay away from the tail, because that tends to make them uncomfortable. I carried her over to an activity station. She's exhibiting nothing but green zone behaviors, and she was happy to climb onto the station where she spent more than an hour exercising. This is one of our adult Morelia Bredli. He is almost 6 years old, and this is typical behavior of him almost every single night. The only time he doesn't request to come out of his enclosure is when he is going through a shedding cycle. As you'll see here, as soon as that door opens, he is out. He doesn't hesitate whatsoever. You can tell he's used to doing this and that he's done this a few times. He knows exactly where he wants to go, and he heads right out. He's a very confident animal, and if I do not let him out, he continues to exhibit that glass pacing incessantly all night long until morning. Now here's our middle of the road snake, and Tao said he's a perfect example of this. He had been pacing his glass when I came into the room, sitting at his door edge. So I opened his doors a little bit on each end, and then I stepped back. I have a couch in this room because I work in this room quite a bit, and I was reading or going over some papers. I was probably about 8 feet away, and I just left him. He was like this for between 2 to 3 hours, just sitting here. He just seemed very content to sit here at the edge of his enclosure with his head out. Prior to me opening the door, he was pacing incessantly. And as soon as I opened the door, he stopped. He made himself comfortable, as you can see here, and he just stayed here like this for a couple of hours. It was over 2 hours, probably close to 3 hours that he stayed here like this before I had to go do other things and put him away. This is what I consider a middle of the road snake, because sometimes he will come out and sometimes he just chooses not to. Here's a super fast example of a snake that has no interest in coming out of the enclosure whatsoever. She raced into her hide and hid before I was even able to finish getting the door open to take this video. And she either burrowed under the substrate or is so far back in that hide I can no longer see her. If everything goes according to plan, next week is going to be about food enrichment or dietary enrichment. And we will be talking about food puzzles and other ways that you can make your snake's diet enriching for them. If any other questions come up for you about physical enrichment, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at behavioureducationllc@gmail.com or through my website at behavioureducation.org or through my Behavior Education Facebook page. I'm happy to receive messages through there or private messages through my regular Facebook. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, please remember to always be kind and love your animals. Have a great week from Lori and TC.